from West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for the Legislature Today is provided by the following.
West Virginia University, online at wvu.edu. The High Technology Foundation, headquartered at the I-79 Technology Park in Fairmont, online at wvhtf.org.
At the legislature today, there was some intense debate on the House floor as lawmakers took up two bills that are priorities for the new majority. Also at the Capitol, labor unions rally against a Senate bill repealing the state's prevailing wage. And West Virginia's craft beer makers are seeking some regulatory relief. They have the backing of Governor Tomblin, but what do lawmakers think of the industry? We'll meet the chairs of the small business committees to find out on the legislature today. Good evening, I'm Ashton Mara. Governor Tomblin has signed another bill passed this legislative session. Senate Bill 280 supports the oil and gas drilling industries. Prior to its passage, companies acquiring assets from existing operations in West Virginia were required to reapply for well drilling permits. This legislation eliminates the reapplication process and authorizes the transfer of existing permits with the approval of the Department of Environmental Protection. At the signing ceremony this morning, the governor was joined by the Senate President Bill Cole, members of the legislature, and representatives from Southwestern Energy. That company recently acquired more than $5 billion in assets from Chesapeake Energy. Senators approved 5 bills on the floor today, including one to extend the home rule program to any municipality of a certain size who wishes to participate. It's a bill that's been fast-tracked in the Senate, however, that grabbed the attention of interest groups today, rallying at the State Culture Center. While the bill slowed slightly, lawmakers still expect to vote on a repeal of the state's prevailing wage early next week.
Letter saying, slow this down. Let's find some compromise.
Steve White is the director of the Affiliated Construction Trades of West Virginia, whose top priority right now is the Senate's proposed legislation to repeal prevailing wage. Prevailing wage is the hourly overtime and benefit rates contractors agree to pay their employees when bidding on publicly funded projects. Supporters say prevailing wage keeps local workers employed and the quality of work up. But opponents say it stifles competition and drives up project costs. The bill was introduced in the Senate last week in single reference to the Committee on Government Organization, which is chaired by the bill's main sponsor, Senator Craig Blair.
We all know that the federal government has really picked the winners and losers when it comes to our coal industry. And the same thing happens with prevailing wage. It's a state government actually dictating out the winners and the losers.
Blair says repeal will allow government money to be spent more wisely, resulting in savings for West Virginia taxpayers. But White says there's no evidence to support Blair's position. In his research, White says he found states that have repealed the requirement have seen no cost savings on public projects and lower overall wages for construction and trade workers. When the bill was introduced last week, Senate Minority Leader Jeff Kessler stood to share his concerns with the repeal, saying he's heard not just from labor, but also from business and industry leaders in his area who want prevailing wages to stay intact.
People say, well, this is a labor bill. If you're for pro-labor, pro-business, I've got a stack of letters here, Mr. President, from businesses in my community, not from labor, but from businesses in my community, saying, stop this train. It's the wrong thing to do. It is radical, it is reckless, and it is wrong. Mr. President, I know you share my vision, and we all do, to create jobs in our state, to raise our standard of living, to improve the lot of our people, to provide for the working men and women of this state. I suggest to you, Mr. President, that this bill will do the exact opposite.
Both Kessler and White see room for compromise in the bill in places like the wage calculation or minimum project cost requirements. White says the prevailing wage is currently calculated by sending a survey to contractors across the state asking what their employees' going rates are. White says the calculation could be fixed, it could be improved, but not unless lawmakers slow down the process to give time for negotiations.
We see that we could find common ground, but we're not having an opportunity to talk about common ground. Instead, bills are being pushed out on party line, and we don't want to be caught between the parties. We just want to have our contractors and workers have a fair deal.
The bill slowed slightly on the floor today. The Senate Committee on Government Organization debated the bill late into the evening Tuesday, making it too late to report back to the full Senate. Instead, Blair says the chamber will receive the bill tomorrow and vote on it early next week. But Blair does expect amendments from both sides of the aisle, some of which he says will likely be approved. That doesn't mean, though, that leadership intends to slow the bill down.
We know that the clock is our enemy. With that said, we've got to make sure that we can get this legislation through this chamber, through the other chamber, to the governor's office. The governor always has the potential to veto it, and then if it does get vetoed, then we have the potential to override his veto. All of that has to take place in the remaining 40 days that we have here.
Blair says his party does not want to lose a crucial piece of legislation because they couldn't beat the clock. Another labor issue was debated in the House today. The bill on the floor took out the words labor interests of the state from the job description of the state labor commissioner. But that wasn't the only bill up for debate and passage in the House, as Liz McCormick reports.
For years, Republicans have called for the nonpartisan election of Supreme Court justices, but the Democrats never put the issue on the agenda. Now, having taken control of the House, Republicans finally got their wish. Before confronting that issue, the House took up Senate Bill 13, which protects a landowner from liability if someone is injured on his or her property. The bill reinstates the open and obvious doctrine. It means a property owner won't be responsible for injuries that a person sustains if it's clear what the conditions are. Delegate John Schott, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, stood to explain that this bill would be worthwhile.
What we're doing here is today, if we vote in favor of this bill, is saying that regardless of a few remote horror stories, we think it's legitimate policy of this state to protect those people who have premises. In those situations where the injury is caused by something that's as well known and obvious to the person who's injured as it would be to the person who occupies those premises.
Senate Bill 13 passed 81-18. Then it was on to House Bill 2010, the nonpartisan election bill. Again, Judiciary Chairman Schott explained why this is good for the state.
This removes the taint of a partisan election from the operation of our judiciary, and it extends not only to our state Supreme Court of Appeals, but to our circuit judges, our family court judges, and our magistrates. And this is intended to remove any perception that those individuals might be beholding to a particular party organization or a particular group of people with whom that party is perceived as being affiliated.
Delegate Barbara Evans-Fleischauer stood to oppose the bill, saying voters want to know which party their candidate is affiliated with.
Well, in our state, we've had some pretty bad experiences with money in judicial elections, and there have been accusations that judicial seats have been purchased by individuals. By not knowing what party a person's in, you are deprived of information and that you otherwise would have in any other election.
But the bill passed overwhelmingly 90-9. But there was uproar about House Bill 2217, relating to the qualifications of the Commissioner of Labor. This bill changes the current definition of the Labor Commissioner by taking out the words labor interests of the state and inserts with experience in employee issues and employee-employer relations. Delegate Mike Caputo, a labor representative, clearly did not like the bill.
This is nothing, Mr. Speaker, in my opinion, with all due respect, but a poke in the eye with a sharp stick to the working men and women in West Virginia. I just cannot believe that we're about to vote on a bill that could allow a Dawn Blankenship to become a commissioner of labor in the state of West Virginia.
House Bill 2117 passed 64-35.
And reinstatements for professional engineers. On second reading, Senate Bill 250 to provide that conservation district supervisors have their applications to participate in a financial assistance program evaluated and approved or rejected by the West Virginia Conservation Agency. It also prohibits a supervisor from voting for a contract in which he or she or an immediate family member is beneficially interested. Senate Bill 279, similar to a bill the House voted on today. The bill removes the term labor interests in the state to require the commissioner to have training and experience in employee-employer relations. Senate Bill 374 to allow in absentia parole hearings in certain instances and waiving a personal appearance by an inmate who is terminally ill and unable to attend. And Senate Bill 375 to specify who receives notice of parole hearings via regular or certified mail.
During his State of the State address in January, Governor Tomblin detailed some of his main priorities for this legislative session. The governor detailed the measures he would ask lawmakers to take to balance this year's budget, bills he would introduce to improve the state's business climate and juvenile justice system. But he also touched on a bill he hopes will incite the growth of an already burgeoning industry in West Virginia, craft brewing. Dave Mistich has more.
Beer, it's the everyman's drink. Fundamentally, it's just yeast, barley, and hops. But for Brian Arnett of Mountain State Brewing Company, located in Thomas and Morgantown, craft brewing, especially here in West Virginia, is something way more than that.
It's a revolution. It's a full-on revolution. It's people that want to know a story behind what they're consuming, and they like the story, and they like the different flavors, and they're provided variety and flavors and things that they would not get otherwise.
If you find yourself in a bar or restaurant in West Virginia, it's nearly impossible not to notice the influx of the state's craft beer offerings on taps, in bottles, and now even cans.
Breweries have been springing up all over in recent years, in virtually every corner of the state. Morgantown Brewing Company Assistant Brewmaster Jesse Sedlock says his operation has grown tremendously since opening in 2009.
When I started here, they were producing maybe 300 barrels a year. This year, we're close to 1,500 barrels a year. So we've actually grown exponentially over the past few years. The draw for craft beer in West Virginia has grown greatly over the last few years. Again, just a few short years ago, there was only maybe 7 or 8 different breweries in West Virginia. This year, there's going to be 12. Next year, there's even more slated to open. So.
With such growth and even more opportunity, brewers began to realize their industry could benefit by banding together. They see competition as a good thing, so much so that Lincoln Wilkins of Blackwater Brewing Company and others had formed the West Virginia Craft Brewers Guild to support the industry as a whole.
We formed a Craft Brewers Guild about a year ago now. It's actually almost spot on a year, about the start of December 2013, and for a couple of reasons. To promote the craft brewing industry in the state of West Virginia, to make people aware of craft beer and what we're doing, and also to work legislatively, to promote hopefully a modernization of some of the craft brewing or some of the alcohol laws that are relevant to the craft brewing industry in the state.
In September, Wilkins and his fellow guild members took to the state capitol for an intermeeting of the legislature's Joint Committee on Economic Development. During that meeting, the group presented a list of desired changes to state law. Bill Rittenauer of Chestnut Brewing Company in Morgantown is relatively new to the state's craft brew scene and says the licensure process to become a resident brewer was arduous.
As I was going through it, I found it to be very lengthy. But then after it was all said and done, I look back on it and I go, it wasn't too bad. I don't know. I've never opened a business before, so it was tough to really gauge it. But it did feel long while I was going through it. It did feel long. But I'd say all in all, it took about 4 months, I would say, from when I submitted all my paperwork to when I was approved.
Aside from the lengthy process of submitting applications and receiving licenses, West Virginia craft brewers say the fees are too steep for those operating on a small scale and discourage others from starting their own operations. They also say limitations on growler sales and the ability to offer tastings or samplings is keeping them from becoming a bigger economic force. Rittenauer says the labeling and alcohol analysis for new varieties could also be streamlined.
Right now, if I want to make an experimental beer, I need to make a test batch. Then I need to send out the samples for alcohol analysis, which is something I can measure and calculate pretty easily and pretty accurately with some of my equipment. But we need to get third-party verification of the alcohol analysis.
There's also this issue of distribution. Currently, brewers are allowed to self-distribute up to 10,000 barrels a year. But getting their beer to the masses and out to a wider radius almost always necessitates a distributor, regardless of the size of the operation. The problem is, they say, once they've signed a contract with a distributor, there's no way out of it. Arnett says some changes could be made to help brewers without hurting distributors in the process.
There's a natural relationship between a brewer and a distributor. Brewers will always use distributors. We self-distribute it ourselves, and to get in every nook and cranny in West Virginia and brew beer, it's way too much. So brewers will always find a natural relationship with the distributors. It doesn't need to be forced, you know. So, and brewers always want to take care of their distributors. That's their customers. So there's a natural wanting to take care of a distributor from a brewer's standpoint. So it doesn't need to be enforced.
With a bill backed by Governor Tomblin, brewers are likely to get some of the things they've been hoping for, including a sliding scale for the resident brewer's license fee based on volume of production. The governor's legislation includes provisions to allow the sale of 4 growlers at a time for off-site consumption, instead of their current limit of 2. And lastly, brewers would be allowed to offer samplings and tastings on brewery tours, putting their industry on par with wineries and distilleries who already have that privilege. Lincoln Wilkins says that aspect can offer a huge boost to the industry as they try to market themselves as a force in what's known as ecotourism. With recreational tourism like rafting, hiking, and rock climbing available in the state, he says the craft beer industry could complement and augment the things West Virginia already offers.
I really do think that that ecotourism interface with craft beer is probably one of the most crucial aspects of what we're doing. And people want that, you know, they want to come in and they're experiencing the locale. They want that local flavor.
And that local flavor is what Wilkins and his fellow craft brewers say they can sell more easily with the help of West Virginia lawmakers. For West Virginia Public Broadcasting, I'm Dave Mistich. Cheers.
The governor's bills about this industry have been referred to the committees that are chaired by our guests tonight. Senator Tom Takuba was invited to be with us this evening but had a scheduling conflict. But joining us is Delegate Carol Miller. She chairs the Small Business Entrepreneurship and Economic Development Committee in the House. She was first elected in 2006 and is from Cabell County. Delegate, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with the piece that we just saw and the governor's bill on the brewing industry. It started in the Senate today, started to go through the committee process, but is the House interested in this legislation?
Absolutely. You'll probably see it come to my committee next week if all things fall in place.
And do you all expect any major debate, any major changes, or do you think that what the industry is asking for, some changes in licensing fees, some abilities to do tastings, you think you all can agree with those?
I do. Last year when the Entrepreneurship Committee, when we traveled around the state, when we came to Huntington, one of the brewers was there and he stated very specifically what his problems were and what he needed to do. And a couple years ago we dealt with issues with wineries that couldn't do tastings at the fairs before 1 o'clock, and people were there at 10. So I think the legislature is looking at how we can best promote it, and it's part of tourism as well. Our ecotourism, with the rafting and the small farms and the different things that we have available in our state. I think this is a real positive.
So I'd like to move on to a bill that's going to come up in your committee tomorrow, House Bill 2444, and that creates these new positions called Small Business Assisters. The West Virginia Small Business Development Center came before your committee earlier this year and said they already have mentors. So what makes these assisters different?
Well, Not a lot, but what it will do, it will basically codify what we're trying to do, which is help small businesses. If they're trying to expand or if they want to open a business, then these allies of the business, they can walk them through. They can help them with permitting and licensure and fees. And then part of what we will look to is in 2 years, we will have the director come back and basically report to the speaker what we did right, where we need to improve it, how we can make our state more welcoming to the small businesses. Instead of having them go to a computer and they're going from site to site to site and trying to follow, and something is in one silo and another silo, this will help the small businesses get where they want to be without stumbling.
Now, I looked at the fiscal note for this bill, and it's a $70,000 fiscal note to pay for one of these positions. Compared to the overall budget, that's a small piece, but do you worry at all that that might be a deterrent for other lawmakers?
No, I don't, because we may not even need $70,000 if the director appoints people that are already there, but just says, you know, this is part of what we need you to do, and while you're doing it, you know, keep records and help us be accountable so that we know what we're doing right and where we need to go.
Okay. Delegate Carol Miller, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And here's a look at some of the bills introduced in the House today.
Among the bills introduced in the House today, House Bill 2582 to require the State Board of Education to equip school buses with safety belts phased in over a period of 5 years. House Bill 2587 to create tax credits for new small businesses for tax years beginning on January 1, 2015 through June 2024. House Bill 2593 to declare the Environmental Protection Agency and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers' proposed rule defining the waters of the United States unenforceable in the state of West Virginia. House Bill 2601 to add sales of motor fuel to the list of products exempted from the unfair trade practices. House Bill 2605 to remove the time limitation for a plaintiff to bring a suit or personal action against a defendant who committed sexual assault or sexual abuse on the plaintiff when the plaintiff was a minor. And House Bill 2609 to prohibit railroads from blocking crossings on privately owned streets. Up for passage in the House tomorrow, House Bill 2128, permitting individuals with concealed weapons permits to keep loaded firearms in their motor vehicles at the state capitol complex. And House Bill 2234 to require a court to permit a party in a divorce proceeding to resume using the name he or she used prior to the marriage. On second reading, House Bill 2004, requiring that the legislature consider the state's plan to conform to the U.S. EPA's carbon emission standard. The bill says that the state disputes the jurisdiction and purported binding nature asserted by the Environmental Protection Agency and reserves the rights and responsibilities to the state of West Virginia. Senate Bill 2008, that beginning May 1, 2015, the Division of Highways shall provide access to all of the division's books, accounts, records, and any other information requested by an independent qualified auditing firm. A report about the efficiency audit is due to the legislature and the governor by December 31, 2015. And House Bill 2151, making the West Virginia Teacher of the Year a non-voting member of the State Board of Education.
This has been the Legislature Today. Tomorrow, we'll meet the new majority leaders at this session, Senator Mitch Carmichael of Jackson County and Delegate Darrell Cowles of Morgan County. We welcome your comments. You can email us at feedback@wvpublic.org. I'm Ashton Mara. Thanks for joining us. Good night.
Support for the Legislature Today is provided by the following:
West Virginia University, online at wvu.edu. The High Technology Foundation, headquartered at the I-79 Technology Park in Fairmont, online at wvhtf.org.